Fuca Strait, and it has a promontory, however one pronounces that word, because some words I'm never quite sure about. The promontory it juts out into the sparkling waters, and in between lectures it was great to sit there and just look out on some of the most beautiful scenery one could ever imagine. But that water could also be treacherous, because one of my colleagues had a sailing vessel. It was a converted lifeboat called Amaryllis, and he had to sail Amaryllis from Vancouver to Victoria in Vancouver Island for it to be put together properly, and he could sail throughout the summer. And he took two of us with him, both of whom were not sailors. I had no experience of sailing whatsoever. And sure enough, we hit a storm in the middle of the Juan de Fuca Strait, and had to take shelter on an island where there was a wrecked, I mean, when I say an island, it was a tiny little bit of rock, and there was a wrecked fishing boat, and we spent most of the night cold and wet and hungry, huddled in this fishing boat before we could carry on the next morning and get to our destination. Well, we didn't actually get to the destination. We holed up in a place called Maple Bay. That's interesting in itself. But it was very welcoming to shipwrecked sailors, and we went ashore because one of us knew some people who lived in Maple Bay. We overnighted for 24 hours and set off the next morning. And right in the middle of Maple Bay, tacking backwards and forwards, looking as if we were experienced sailors, the mast snapped and broke, and we had to be rescued from the shore. Well, talk about indignity. It was just awful. We had to sort of creep up into the people that had put us up overnight, giving us shelter, warmth and shelter. Fortunately, one of the people that did it was a very attractive young lady whom I dated for a little while after that. And it was not an unpleasant experience. One of the things you have to understand, though, about people who live on Vancouver Island, and it's still true today, is that they're in a time warp. They live in the England of the 1950s, and they behave as if they're in the England of the 1950s. And they have the same class system of the England in the 1950s, and the same mannerisms. And actually, while that sounds quaint, it ain't. It is, because the same prejudices of the 1950s England have stuck with them, and they really are a throwback. At 80, I describe myself sometimes as a dinosaur. This wasn't even a dinosaur. It was a village of the damned. But anyway, it was an interesting experience, and I have never been back to Maple Bay, and to be quite honest with you, I don't have any great desire to do so. Right, after a bit of a rollicking on the sea, let's have a look. There's one here called Lost Native. Have no idea what that's about, but let's see what Lost Native has to say for itself. that's sort of jolly, isn't it? Wow, 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 first thing in the morning. Well, the lost native, if we find him, very jolly sort of fellow. Well, well, well. Anyway, I was just talking about Vancouver and one of my experiences of being shipwrecked. Ha ha, Tom Hanks, eat your heart out. It was a bit like Tom Hanks, except that there was no good ending, and we were rescued. But the little islet that we were shipwrecked on in the first instance was just so barren. I mean, there's nothing on it at all, not even a seal. Even they wouldn't go there. So if we'd have been stranded there forever, fortunately we got the little yacht going enough to get us onto the main coastline of Vancouver Island. And you know, it's funny. People successfully use the cough switch again. People who are worldly wise, quite often, if somewhere isn't in the mainstream, don't quite understand the structure of communities overseas. Now, Vancouver Island was the first populated of British Columbia, which is the westernmost province in Canada. And I'm getting just a little bit of a coffee cough this morning. But the island was first colonized, if you like, and then the mainstream coastal, continental coast of British Columbia came under its sway, under its domain. But the main city of British Columbia, not the main city, because Vancouver is the main city, but the capital city is Victoria, which is a very, very, very pretty town. The buildings, the Parliament buildings, sit above a lovely little harbour. They're manicured and kept immaculately. The harbour itself is a happy little harbour with little banana boats buzzing about, sort of like taxis. So they're called banana boats because that's their shape. The Empress Hotel, owned by the Canadian Pacific Railway Company and once destined for demolition. And it's one of those very fine Victorian edifices, a magnificent hotel, and it sits also looking down on the harbour. And Victoria is charming. Unfortunately, it has the nickname of for the newlywed or the nearly dead, because apart from government, there isn't much there at all. And people tend to come in by ferry from the States, from ferry which comes to a place called Sydney, which is where a good friend of Mirador Television and a correspondent, Rupert Lloyd-Thomas, originally from Lewes in East Sussex in the UK, went to live, and it is a little way from Victoria, so you have to take a bus or a taxi or whatever, or if you're picked up by friends, they drive you down there. But right into the harbour itself, there are plenty of float planes, and I've been many a time. I've been on the float plane service out of Vancouver Harbour into Victoria Harbour, and there was one. I can't remember what sort of plane it was, but it was a 20-seater. And the service was a very good service, and they started it, and I travelled on it several times. But then one of the pilots managed to upend it nose down in Victoria Harbour, and there was a cabinet minister on board. That didn't do the company much good in terms of reputation, although nobody was seriously hurt, I'm happy to say. But Victoria is a gorgeous place, and if you ever want to go and stay for a weekend or a week or even more in a place of real beauty and really relaxed, Victoria is the place to go. I have friends there who live in Victoria, and I have to say that they live an idyllic life. They are the centre of the community. They meet royalty every time they go there, and go to all the right dinners and belong to the right clubs and so on and so forth. Rather nice. But it does mean that they are living life to the full in Victoria. Vancouver. Vancouver, once the Barkerville Times. Barkerville is a ghost town, if you like. It's been resurrected each summer so that they replay the days when it was a gold mining town. And it had for its day 6,000 or 7,000 people there, all either living off those who were finding gold or the people looking for gold themselves, with Barkerville. And the Barkerville Times of 1820 or 1830 or whatever says that there's a little community down on the coast called Vancouver. It'll never amount to much, it's too far from Barkerville. The gold ran out, and so did the people. And so today Barkerville has been saved because it is a tourist town. They recreate the old bar, saloons. They recreate the old West, if you like. They recreate all sorts of things, and the dancing girls and the whole thing. And it really is well worthwhile. But its population, permanent population, is about 120 people. Vancouver, on the other hand, has grown to be close to 1 million, I believe. It was 400,000 when I was there, and that's 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Vancouver grew up to be the major city in British Columbia. But it might not have been, because if any of you have ever watched the old movie with James Stewart playing a man called Van Horn, Van Horn was the architect, the surveyor who found the Crow's Nest Pass, which was the way through the Rocky Mountains, from the plains, from the prairies, down to the coast, Vancouver. But he came to the top of what is now known as the Indian Arm. It's an inlet. It was about 10 or 12 miles long, and to a place called Port Moody, and that's where he planned to create his city, until he got a delegation